start the recording, and we will make sure that this session is broadcast and shared with you after the fact. So welcome, everyone. Today, is your compliance training ready for a makeover? And I'm sure most of us are ready for a makeover, including myself there. That's me. I'm Cammy Bean. I'm the Vice President of Learning Design for Kineo US. Kineo is a global e-learning company. We operate in many countries. I am part of our US team, but we've got a big headquarters in the UK, and we have operations in China, Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, South Africa, Israel. And we are really excited to share with you today some examples of e-learning that we've created over the years with compliance. I've got Nick Murphy on with me today as our producer. He will be monitoring the question pod and helping folks out if you're having any issues. Say hi, Nick.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
So thanks for joining. And without further ado, we'll just kind of dive in from a technical standpoint, add any questions into the question pod, and I'll try to pause here and there and have Nick share with us what people are thinking. You can add comments, and we'll share contact information at the end of all of this. So here's the setup. Your organization is required to train employees and tick off a box, right? Does that sound familiar in terms of compliance training? And a lot of people think of themselves as box tickers. And really what this compliance training is reducing risk for your organization and your people. That's what we're trying to do with compliance training, right? And yet, what we have so often are employees who are just bored to tears by the training that gets produced in the name of compliance. And I've heard countless stories as I go out and I work with clients over the years, or just even talking to people in my community who ask me what I do for a living, and they start ranting on e-learning. And I think a lot of it's this compliance-based e-learning that gets created with just tons of locked out screens and audio file after audio file, and it takes an hour, and it's the same content every year, and it's just boring people to tears. And you hear stories of people posting the answers to the final exams on the refrigerators in the employee lounge room. This is how people are viewing a lot of this compliance training out there. But we don't want to do that, right? We have love in our hearts, and we have empathy for the human beings that have to sit down on the other end. And more importantly, we want to create something that's relevant and engaging, and that really does reduce risk within our organization. We're not just ticking off boxes. We want to help things go to get better, right? And you're not alone. And I think in the invitation for this session, we shared some statistics about how people really see learner fatigue as the #1 problem in compliance training. It's a big problem. People are multitasking. They're paying attention to 5 other things. I mean, even right now, while I am on this webinar with you all, you are probably checking email, eating your lunch, checking your voicemail, maybe looking at Facebook. And that's okay. I understand that. I'm not taking it personally. But that's the same kind of competition that we have with our e-learning programs. So we've got to keep people's attention, and everyone's struggling with it out there. So today, what we're going to do is look at 10 tips that we can apply to compliance training to give it a simple makeover. And I'm not talking about hardcore, like, really costly efforts that are going to make this into this crazy whiz-bangy game, that appeals to today's learning generation as people use. And you can't see the air quotes that I'm using with my fingers, but we want simple things that don't overcomplicate it. And it's not about over-designing compliance training, too. I think a lot of people have a tendency to over-design. We want to keep compliance training short, sharp, and to the point, with really a focus on intention, which is what we're trying to get the learner to do, how we want them to reduce risk within the organization. So let's look at 10 tips. First off, how can we make it memorable, right? Engaging e-learning is memorable. It sticks, and it creates some kind of an emotional or visceral hook. I'm going to switch over to some examples right now, if I can. And unfortunately, I closed down my browser, so let me pull up all my bookmarks now. All right, so we're talking about getting people's attention.
Viruses and corporate espionage threaten to infiltrate our networks. Now, more than ever, we need information security superheroes like you to join the fight to protect privacy and safeguard our precious information. During the next half hour.
All right, I'm not going to keep the audio going for too long. I hope you were able to hear that. This is the opening sting to an information security program that could have been just the most boring course in the universe. And instead, we started it off with this really visually striking hook to get people paying attention. Yes, we did have some good assets and some good artwork to work with, and your organizations may not have access to that kind of thing. But I think very simply, if we start our courses off with something powerful and memorable, you're going to have a more engaging experience that will hook them and get them paying attention. I think we've got a mantra at Kineo that we need to help your learners sit up and pay attention, and we've got to do it early and we've got to do it often throughout an e-learning program. So what are ways that you can make your e-learning programs more memorable? And love to hear some ideas of how people are doing that within your own organizations and with your own training. So that was Dr. Zilla Zombot, and she's the evil information security hacker, and the whole course is structured around trying to help prevent her from putting the company at risk and putting employees at risk. So obviously that kind of hook that you use needs to be relevant and needs to make sense. And here it really did, and this is a very appealing e-learning program. It actually won a Brandon Hall Award, which we're very proud of. But I think it pulls in nicely to the second topic here, the second tip, which is about making it fun. And compliance training fun, it sort of seems like an oxymoron. And we don't want to overdo it. It's not about making everything a little game, but I think where you can find a twist and you can find some kind of an engaging hook to the content, you can do that. So going deeper into this program, the Superhero Academy, we told the story of information security in this comic book format. And there's a lot of basic information in this course, but we wove this fun element of this story and this quest against Dr. Zilla Zombot. And while I'll bring us back into the course itself so you can see some of the structure of it. So these are standard menu topics in your program. And we go into the e-learning itself. And from a build standpoint, it's pretty typical e-learning screens. This is what we call a text and a graphics screen. And we're setting up a story here. The email looks urgent. And we're enticing the learner to click and see what happens when they click on links that they shouldn't click on. And oh my gosh, we've had an information security breach, and Dr. Zilla Zombot has now taken over your computer. Kind of adds that fun element to things. And now here we are. Here's the information, and we're presenting it within this story. We kind of call this a guided story approach. We've made it memorable. We've made it fun. Hopefully, we're going to have greater retention because people are going to actually sit through this and absorb some of this information. So how can you do this in your own programs without hiring, high-end comic book artists? I think there's other ways to do it. This is another example from a food service program, kind of that same graphic novel approach. And we've been playing with this a lot more internally, and I know other organizations are doing this as well, like how to tell your story through a graphic novel. So this is all about food service and the bacteria that you find, and it's told in this kind of fun format with interesting graphics and this storyline. It'd be interesting to hear people, if you want to interject into the comments pod as we're going along, if you feel like there are any hurdles to any of these approaches. And one of the things I've heard to this graphic novel approach that people don't like, well, one is they feel like they're not going to be able to afford it. And that can certainly be a limitation, but I think there's easy enough ways to do it with simple stock graphics, even stock photos, and just tell a story through photography. But and actually with that first story of Dr. Zilla Zombot, some of the feedback came back that, it feels like you're not treating us like adults. It's a comic book, and but what we found in that program and the survey results showed that for the most part, a lot more people connected with it, engaged with it. And there were a few outliers who said it made, felt like you were not taking their content seriously. but that was the exception. You might have an issue trying to get this approach through with senior stakeholders if they feel like this is their, their sacred content or it's, it's illegal information. But I think one thing that you can do is try a few different approaches and see what works within your audience and see what's more appealing and what gets more use. Where are people actually finishing a course, and look at some of your data on what's keeping people through. All right, so tip number 3, we want to show consequences. And what is this about? I mean, compliance training is about reducing risk, right? So if people don't do what it is that they're supposed to do, that this compliance training is all about, there would be a consequence. There's some kind of, outcome. You either be fined or you get fired or, you could lose your job, all of those things. So what are the consequences? And let's show it so people give it that visceral element. I think most employees want to reduce risk, and, unless they're horrible criminals and they're out there trying to actually steal billions of dollars from your organization, most people are trying to do the right thing and don't want those consequences to become real. So how can we show them? And it could be something as simple as this. This is a course built in Articulate, where we just created a very simple build here, where we're just showing what happened. This is a compliance course on understanding UAAP. UAAP is the Unfair, Deceptive, something Practices Act. It's a law here in the U.S. about protecting consumers from fraud and fraudulent activity within financial organizations. So we want to show the risks here up front. And this headline approach gets used a lot, but showing what happens. This is what could happen to our organization if we don't follow this practice. Here, this is from the same program. We tell the story of one customer who ended up getting charged $50 for a cup of coffee, basically, because of the way his credit card got set up and overdraft protection. So showing the consequences on a personal level to an individual, to a consumer. So here the UAAP law is to protect our customers, our consumers out in the world. So you're protecting your organization, but you're also protecting the people at the other end. And I think that's really important. There's such a human element to compliance. There's a reason why we do a lot of these things. It might be just to protect your rear end, but often there's, a human element to it. And I think bring that in with your stories and your examples and show consequences that are meaningful and are going to connect to people. There's not always just about relating those statistics. Which brings me to tip number 4, which threaded throughout everything I've said. I think, probably to lead with this one, but it's telling stories. Stories work for so many reasons in e-learning, and whatever I'm talking about e-learning or presenting on e-learning and better design, this is a point I always make. We need to bring stories into it. It makes them more human, makes your content more human. It makes your content more relevant. Ultimately, it's more memorable. Research shows on the stickiness factor, we are going to remember a story much more than we're going to remember a listing of facts. So you put it into context for people. They see how they can apply it to their own world. It makes it more memorable. So how can you add those stories into it? And I think I love sharing this story. It was a research study done at Northeastern University, essentially looking at gossip in people. And what they did was they put these lenses on people's eyes and or some kind of a slideshow so that you saw a different image with each eye. And before they showed all of these images, they told stories about each of these pictures. So, maybe it was a person who'd done something bad, or it's just a house. And they gave a little bit of an emotional tinge to each of these pictures. And then when they showed the slides to people, so they had one image in one eye and one image in the other eye, people were more attentive to the images where there was a story of negative consequences. So there's a story of risk. We are primed, I think, biologically to pay attention to those stories. It's like a warning sign. You kind of know which mates to watch out for, and which people you've got to cover yourself from. We are tuned to these stories of gossip, and I think that's one of the reasons why they work as well. It's just part of our nature. Humans have been sitting around campfires for millennia, and there's a reason for that, and we've got to pull that into our e-learning. So here's an example of what not to do, right? This is content that we got from a client that wanted us to teach their staff about their vacation policy. And I'm sure a lot of you are teaching policies within your organization. This is at a financial institution. And their policy, and as we did a little bit of digging, we found out that their policy was in place. They have this policy that you have to take 2 consecutive weeks of vacation time a year. And that is required. And so why is this policy in place? And that's where the interesting piece comes in. And so instead of just throwing up a policy like this on the screen, we found the story behind that, why this policy was in place.
Hey, Cammy.
So, yeah.
We have a question from Terry Carson.
Okay, Terry, yeah.
She's wondering, can you share tips and techniques for developing a story?
For developing the story, do you mean on the technical side in the software tools, or do you mean in terms of coming up with what that story might be? And I'm going to guess that's what you mean. And I think finding out what story to tell, I think that's a great example, and that's kind of what we did here in this, with this case study policy, was going into the meeting and asking the subject matter experts a lot of questions. And what I like to do is I like to ask the subject matter experts to tell me stories about the information. And they often have really good stories, and those stories can become the basis for what you tell in the program. You might have to protect names to, or change names to protect the innocent, but that's one good way to pull things out. You could survey people. You could go, walk the floor and find out from the people what's going on. Does that answer the question, Carrie? Or sort of starting? I mean, I think there's a whole conversation we could have there on working with subject matter experts. It's probably for another webinar.
Yes, that answered her question perfectly. Thanks.
Okay, great. So here what we did was we found out that critical piece is because if you don't take two weeks of vacation in a year, it might be because you are hiding something. And so this program opens up and you see these 2 characters, and they are quite notorious, it turns out, because each of these people did not take 2 weeks of vacation, and it turned out that they were stealing billions of dollars from their financial institutions. And they knew that if you don't take any days off, it's because you don't want to leave your book to another person who might find out that you're hiding things or that you're cooking your books. So we led with the story. That gets people really interested in why this policy matters, right? So they start to see, oh, there is risk involved here, and this is why there's risk, and this is why we need to learn this information. So your whole program maybe isn't built around this story. Maybe it is, but you pull them in with that strong hook and tell that story, and that is so much more memorable because, you want me to remember this? No way. I'm not going to remember what I can't even understand it. It's so full of jargon and just it's not the way humans talk. But this story, a trader who doesn't take any days off is a trader who doesn't want to leave his book to another. You kind of got it right there. All right, let's look at another story. This is a program, Behavior in the Workplace, we did for another financial institution. And the scene is set up, and actually the way the whole program is set up, it's only 5 sections in the program. It's probably about 20 minutes in length. They have a really lengthy policy about behavior in the workplace, and I'm sure a lot of you have something like that. And we spent a little bit of time up front in the program, probably 5 minutes, doing what I call telling just the facts. Doing a quick run-through of what you need to know about the policy and what's in it. But what we really wanted to spend time doing in this program was showing them behavior in the workplace in context, right? And telling a story about it. So we set it up. There's 3 stories in this program. This is the story of Screaming Ruth. And Screaming Ruth is kind of, she's kind of a, you just look at her. She doesn't look like she's probably the most pleasant woman to work with. And there's a person on her staff, Bobby, and he just keeps getting frustrated with him, and she starts yelling at him. And the way we told this story, we call this a film strip template, but it's just text and graphics. There's no audio here. It's very simple to build and design. These are all stock photos. We use a company called eLearningArt, elearningart.com, And you can buy character packs of people so that you can tell these stories really easily. One of the frustrations people have when trying to tell stories in a visual format is using stock photography, using iStock or something. You might only have 3 shots of the person. So how do you tell a really effective story? So something like a character pack through elearningart.com lets you get a character in multiple poses. So there you see Ruth is in a red shirt, and off on the right she's in this black shirt. So the story escalates, and Ruth ends up yelling at Bobby in front of people, and somebody then goes and tells HR because employees are made uncomfortable. And then Ruth comes back, and she's really upset, and she's threatening retaliation against whoever told her. So it's this really kind of exciting story. It's the kind of thing that can happen in an organization. It's the kind of thing that can happen in this organization. And so to Terry's question, we spent a lot of time. I worked with the lawyers at this organization coming up with this story. It took time. So I'm not saying you can always just pull these stories out of a hat, but we had to make sure that the subtle nuances were right and it was illustrating a key point. This looks very similar to that the superhero course, and it is. This is another program on social media. We told the case that we kind of took these different scenarios of these different characters and threaded them throughout these cases, and it was case files, and it was really simple e-learning design from a it's not a crazy game or anything, but through all of these examples, we're seeing how social media, what the rules are around social media, and what you need to be doing to protect yourself, to protect the organization, to protect your colleagues. And that's really what it all comes down to. So find a cool story, find a good way to tell it. Any questions coming up right now? Am I good to just keep rolling?
As of now, I'd say keep rolling. If a question does come up, I'll be sure to let you know, though.
Okay, great. All right, tip number 5, make it personal. Make it all about you. And I think that this is, we'll see this kind of come threading back in some of the other tips that I share as well. And a lot of these, I would say, these are 10 tips. You could probably group them into 3 or 4 categories or something, and there's a lot of crossover to them. So making it personal, what does that mean? It's putting the learner on the spot in a way, getting them to reflect on how this content matters to them, what they need to do with it. This is a program on scouting, and actually, let me show this to you. Well, I'll come back to this one in a minute, but I'll show you the full demo in a minute. But we actually have them rate how confident they are on the code of behavior that the volunteers at this organization should follow. This is a little self-assessment at the beginning of the program, and at the end we have them come back and rate their confidence again. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not part of a scored thing, but it's getting the learner reflecting on how this matters to them and how well they understand. And I think if you put them on the spot like that, I think that's really important. So we want to make it about you. And a lot of the content, I think it's in how you write it as well. So instead of writing our e-learning programs in a very impersonal tone, talk to you, the learner. So how do you know the code of behavior that volunteers should follow? What do you need to do? How confident are you? Keep it talking like it's a conversation, and you're going to help make it personal and point out ways that it's relevant to the learner. It can be harder if you're dealing with a large audience, but I think if you still keep that conversational tone, provide opportunities for reflection, and people will start making some of those connections themselves. I think a piece of making it personal comes back to telling a story too, right? So making it personal can mean just showing how this policy impacts real people. So maybe we should have called it making it human. It's all back to the story. So here we see why does UAAP matter, and we tell the stories of 3 people. This could be your mother, this could be your sister, this could be you, it could be your brother, and this is what happened to them. So Susan here called to activate the new card, and it turned out the agent sells her roadside assistance, which she doesn't even need because she doesn't have a car. and she thought that maybe her daughter could use it, and it turns out that her daughter can't. So she was deceived, and this is bad. And you know, poor Susan. Now we have this personal connection with Susan, and we feel like, wow, okay, I see why this law matters. So how can you make it personal? How can you tell this story, make it relevant? Here's another, excuse me, example. This is another information security program, and man, it seems like we're writing a lot of these days. Everyone's got InfoSec on their minds, and here we've made it personal by putting you into the scenario. So you're running a workshop on strong passwords, and you ask the group what they think makes a strong password, and they all give different answers. Who's got the right idea? And so you just click on each of these people, and they give you their answer, and then there's a little feedback so you can kind of assess how he's doing. And I think this is, you know, it puts you into the shoes, and you're really trying to experience this more in a first-person kind of a way. And all of these pictures, FYI, these are just that elearningart.com character packs, so really easy to get shots like this. We treated them very simply, so in the first instances, they're all black and white. And once you click on someone, they go into full color. It's a nice little touch. This is my favorite one, which is focusing on the gray areas. And I think a lot of compliance and regulation, sometimes there's a right or a wrong answer, and it's very cut and dry. But sometimes there is uncertainty. There's some of those gray areas that you don't really know what to do. And I think the behavior in the workplace example is a good one because you don't always know what the right answer is. So at the end of the scenario that we told of Screaming Ruth, Ruth threatens retaliation against Valerie, who has gone to HR. And we are now asked, was Ruth right? Like, should Valerie have gone to HR? Did Valerie do the right thing? And it turns out, you know, is Ruth's behavior inappropriate? And often the answer to that first level kind of a question is really easy. Well, yeah, her behavior is inappropriate. But what we really have to dig down into more deeply here is why that behavior was inappropriate. And people don't always know the rationale behind it. They kind of get the obvious, yeah, that's not the right thing to do, but why? So we crafted very carefully, again, this is with the legal team, these responses, and we wanted each of the responses to be very plausible, things that could really, you know, you might really think. And ideally what you're doing, to Terry's question earlier, is working with your subject matter experts to understand where people make mistakes, where are those misconceptions, and where are those shades of gray. So here, Ruth appears to have a grudge against Bobby because he is a younger man. This could be considered discrimination. And that seems like that could be a very plausible response. Ruth is what we call an equal opportunity yeller. She yells at everyone, creating an unpleasant, uncomfortable work environment for her team. An equal opportunity yeller, now that's intriguing. And then the last one, and within, you know, a high-powered financial institution, easy to mistake this one. It's fine to yell at people. The problem is that Ruth threatened retaliation against whoever called HR. You know, we're a high-stress organization. It's part of our culture. We just yell at each other. That's how we get things done. That might be, people might think that that's an okay response. The correct answer here is to the equal opportunity yeller. But you're getting people to reflect on the whys. I think that's really important. So help them delve into those gray areas, and your feedback can reinforce it in a solid way. And this is a very simple screen. It's just a multiple choice question from a template standpoint, but it's all in how you dig into that content, find the story behind it, and uncover what those areas of gray might possibly be in regards to this particular compliance rule or regulation or the point that you're teaching. Number 7, we're moving right along. I think we're going to be done a little bit early, which will be good. We can leave time for questions, and then people can go back to their regularly scheduled programming of eating lunch and checking Facebook or whatever it is you're doing today. So 7 is make the learner's role clear. And what do we mean by that? I think it's really about helping the learner, the participant in your e-learning program, understand what their role is in reducing risk for your organization. So how do you go about protecting people, protecting the company, protecting yourself? What do you need to do? And here we have a whole topic, what can you do? So there we're doing that, making it personal. So we're talking to you directly, making it a conversation, and pointing out at very specifically what it is that you can do as an individual regarding UAAP. So make that role very clear to the learner and very explicit. That's going to be their key takeaway. That's going to be what the learner walks away with and does ultimately. Let me go back to my bookmarks here and show you another example. So this is a program for a Scout association, and it's on this behavior, not behavior in the workplace, but their code of conduct. Lots of code of conducts getting created these days. So in this section, and you can kind of see we've got this one structured with a little bit of the facts. So a general intro, what is abuse, bullying, our roles, your responsibility. So here we're making the learner's role really explicit in this topic. And then finally we would end up with something like, what would you do? So we want to make the learner's role very explicit. It's okay to cuddle a young person if they get upset. That's the question here on the screen. And now you get to go see, you get to go kind of go through and explore some of these. Kind of a myth, it's debatable. Help them see in context what their role might be. And here we're doing it through a story. And this is that slider bar I showed you a screenshot of earlier. How confident are you? So we're making it very personal, getting them to reflect on what they need to do. All right, so this is kind of the meat of it. Our position of trust. So as an adult in the Scout Association, you are in a position of trust in relation to young people in Scouting. And it really makes it explicit what you need to do. And I think by telling a story, by putting it into context, and calling it out very clearly what your role is in preventing this risk. It's not just putting up the policy, but it's making it very explicit and clear to people. Include a clear call to action. So we've talked in tip number 7, we talked about making your role very clear, but often there is something specific that we want them to do at the end of the course. So the learning doesn't end here. There's something that we want you to do. We want you to follow up and read more on this policy. We want you to reach out to your supervisor. We want you to find out who is in charge of this particular thing. It's going to be a call to action. And if we include a strong and clear call to action, what we are doing is helping prevent this learning from just being this single event to being something that carries out into the real world, right? And that's a danger a lot of e-learning falls into. It's this 20-minute thing, you tick off the box, and you never think about it again. But as an employee of an organization that's trying to reduce risk, we want them to be thinking about this content. We want them to be continuing this and making it explicit in their everyday life. This is a program on safety, and one of the last screens of this course, and really kind of the final takeaway here, the call to action, is make sure you know the reporting requirements in your area. Who's your supervisor? Do you know the steps to take if an accident happens? And then what you're going to do is you will actually include links to all of those things. And provide them with, teach them how to fish. If you're pointing them to, maybe you have on an internet site, you've got all those documents in a certain place. Help them go off and find them and know where they are so that if there is an issue, they know what they need to do to follow through on something. Often a lot of compliance training, things that you don't come across for months and months on end. So you kind of need to let them know that this policy is in place and let them know where to go to find out more information. So if they come across a situation that dives into those gray areas, they know what to do. This is my favorite one. keeping it simple. And I have scissors there because it's all about cutting, really about cutting your content. So often, compliance people, lawyers, they want everything in it, right? They want the entire policy. They want all the legal jargon and all the documentation. They want everything in your e-learning program. And you might have to tick off that box and include all of that content. And I've got some ideas in one course I kind of bookended. They were really, really committed to having all of this content in the middle of the course. And they wanted to make sure that people had seen every single screen of it. And it was dense and it had a lot of jargon, but they wouldn't back down as much as I tried consulting and educating them about it. So what I did, the technique that I used on that was I bookended all these topics that had all this dense content with characters who kind of relayed the key messages back in layperson's talk. So they might, at the beginning of a topic, they might say, so I think what you're telling me is blah, blah, blah. And then when we go through all this content, and at the end, you see that same character come back and say, okay, I get it. Here's what I need to do. So we satisfied, in that case, we satisfied the legal team's requirements for having all of their content, but we also tried to keep that human element in for the learner. And I think it made a difference in making that content much more accessible. So back to this behavior in the workplace course, I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the structure of it. You can see this is a 3, 9, I can't do the math, like 17 minutes total content. So it's about 17 screens. In the first two sections, we really set the tone. We have that just the facts. And then we keep the focus on these scenarios. So it's lean and mean, and it's keeping the focus on the risks. And I think that's really important. If you go into your e-learning design development process and you know what your intention is and you know what risks you're trying to reduce, keep your focus on that, and you can create a simpler, sharper course. People don't want to sit here endlessly for hours and be bored to tears. So let's keep it as relevant and sharp as we can. Avoid that jargon. Keep it really simple, the language. Cut as much as you can. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a more memorable experience that will keep people hooked and also make sure that you adhere to whatever regulations you need to. That box that we all have to tick sometimes. A big piece of that is linking to policies and not replicating them. So don't have 10 pages of e-learning screen that is the document itself. You can actually link off to the policy if you need to. And I'm going to show you some screenshots. This is I thought this is brilliant. It's a code of conduct course. And a big piece of it, you've kind of got up in the middle, you've got just an opening quiz that tests what you know about the code, which is kind of it's about 5 or 6 questions, and it focuses your attention as you go through the content. Find out more is maybe 10 screens worth of that information, what I call just the facts. Then the bulk of this course is focused on, we call it over to you. And you pick a character that you identify the most strongly with. In this case, I picked the supervisor. And I'm going to follow the life of a supervisor can present tough challenges. Let's follow Candy as she tries to overcome a range of dilemmas while trying to run a busy kitchen. So that's my role. I've chosen my role. And I'm going to go through, here's a little bit of an overview of Candy and who she is. And it presents, it's kind of setting up the context for this, because this is much more of a scenario-based approach where we're going to be applying the policy to these situations. And at various points in this scenario, Candy is given a challenge. So one of Candy's friends contacts her. He manages a restaurant, and he wants someone to ask Candy if she can cover some of the extra shifts. So what should Candy do? So if you look down here in the bottom, so there's 3 options here. This is a multiple choice question screen. We can ask the expert, and if you click on the Ask the Expert button, you hear an audio clip from an expert kind of giving you an overview. And you can also refer to their code of business conduct. And if you click on that button, it opens up the entire policy. So it's helping you in the context of this scenario. You go to this policy now, this document, and you have a reason for looking through it, right? How many times have you started a new organization and you have to go read the employee manual and the handbook and the business conduct, and you sign a sheet that says that you've read them because you're ticking that box, but you probably didn't really read it. So here we've given them a scenario and a reason to go off and read it. So you need to in order to answer this question, you might need to refer to the policy. And that makes it much more meaningful. And it also means you're not sending thousands of screens and boring your learner to tears by having them read every single screen. So, and will that still work with your compliance department and your legal team? Will they go for that approach? Maybe. I mean, you might have some resistance, and I think that's the real challenge. And that was our 10 tips. Wow. All right, so 10 tips for making your compliance training more engaging, perhaps more interesting. And I'd love to hear now, obstacles you might think there are to overcome, what do you have to overcome to do something like this? Is this stuff people are doing already? And if not, any questions that you might have right now? I know we've had a few questions about the slides and things like that. We will send you a recording of this after today. I will post these slides up on SlideShare, and Nick will send those out as a link to everyone. If you follow me on Twitter, and I'll give you my info in just a moment. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll put the link up on Twitter once I get these slides posted up there, and you can check them out and review them. So that's a bit of the technical or the logistical questions. There's my Twitter handle at Cammy Bean.
Cammy, we do have a question from Doug Matson. He wants to know, how do you convince SMEs to use stories? Tips for selling.
Tips for selling them on why stories are better?
Yeah.
Yes, SMEs are hard to, your subject matter experts are so wedded to their content, right? They love it. They want all 5,000 bullet points. They think it's all critical and all essential. So from an instructional design point, and this isn't just about compliance training, by the way, this kind of applies to any kind of training that you're doing, is if you have a really good understanding and agreement to what it is that you're trying to achieve in the training program that you're creating. So, we might call those instructional objectives. So you've decided what your objectives are for this program. More importantly, you've decided on what the performance objectives are for the program. What is it that you want the learner to be able to do at the end of this program? What are those key takeaways? Then what you do is you map back every piece of content to those learning objectives. And if that content does not support one of those objectives or one of those performance objectives, it shouldn't be in the course. You might be able to link to it and provide a link to it. So that's a way to help call down content. Now, how do you convince them that stories are better? I mean, I think you could tell a story about why stories are better. Excuse me. I think you kind of the proof is in the pudding. I mean, ask them how they, what's more memorable. Have them, there's sort of education here. You could actually find some statistics and research on why storytelling is more effective. There's a great book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, Heath, and that looks at ways to make content stickier. I'm sure I could dig up some more books for you on this because it's kind of accepted practice these days. So I think we often just have to talk to our subject matter experts and show them the evidence, show them why stories work better and why they are more memorable and how they are and what the statistics are. So that could be one way to help them. You can get them reflecting on their own experience as well, too. I mean, think about the courses, think about even classroom courses that you've been in. And what do you remember? Do you remember the facts that the teacher taught you, or do you remember the story they told you about how when they went to get donuts and the donut fell and they, whatever the story was about? That's stuck in your head better than the 5 facts or statistics they shared. So I'll try and dig up some resources on storytelling and why that's effective. I mean, I feel like we can't go anywhere these days without tripping over statistics about that. So I'll dig some stuff up for you. Any other questions?
No questions as of now.
The crowd was struck dumb. Please feel free to ask any questions. Our contact information is here. We have lots of great resources on the Kineo website. If you don't know Kineo.com, now is the time. My personal story, I've worked for the company for about 4 years, and I had a love affair prior to joining Kineo, where I was on the website all the time, reading resources, reading guides, learning about great instructional design, and my corporate crush ended up, well, because I ended up, I now work for the company. I write a lot of the resources on that website, but it really is a great wealth of information and lots of wonderful things. We do have a compliance training guide. Nick is in the process of updating that. It's on our website, but we're going to be sending out an update to that, and we will email that to you as part of the follow-up from today's session. I will post the slides from today, as I said, up on my SlideShare site. It's just www.slideshare.com, and you can search on Cammy Bean, and I will have those up by the end of the day. I will also post a link to those on Twitter for you all, and my Twitter handle is @CammyBean, and you can follow @Kineo as well. We are there. Our emails are here. We have a LinkedIn e-learning professionals group. Lots of good conversation going on over there. We encourage you to join that. I think it's something like 6,000 people right now in that group. So I'd love to see you there. And thank you very much. It's been a great lunch hour with you all. Lunch 45 minutes, I guess. So hope you got something out of today, and look forward to staying connected.